Hey guys, in the last video I said that there would be another video to take precedent over this, but then my last video was quite poorly received, and it just so happens that the video I was planning on making would be similarly controversial. So I've decided to jump a bit ahead and make the response video that my patrons actually voted for. So if you're not from the UK, there's a chance you don't know who Jonathan Pie is. He became popular in 2014-2015, and his whole shtick was that he played a reporter who would break character in the middle of his reports and angrily point out just how utterly stupid or evil the subject of his report was being. Originally, he would just make vague, inappropriate comments before quite quickly graduating to actual political takes, and in some ways the videos were quite refreshing. In the UK, our media is very reserved and non-partisan, at least when it comes to television. We also don't have big news channels. The biggest news channel is the BBC, and well, as a state-owned news channel, they are expected to be strictly impartial when they report things. So in this context, Jonathan Pie makes perfect sense. We see reporters talk about very obviously evil or incompetent things done by the government, and it's totally dispassionate. The idea of a reporter being unable to contain their rage and launching into a full-on rant about how obviously fucked everything is has some very obvious entertainment value and can be pretty cathartic. However, there is a serious limitation that comes with Pie's style, mostly because Pie presents himself as the reporter who says what we're all thinking, and sometimes that's a reasonably accurate description of someone. However, a lot of the time it's not.
Here's my impression of an East German woman. Kiss me or I'll crush you.
He says what we're all thinking.
I'm not thinking that.
A lot of the time, various right-wing populists are described by their supporters as saying what we're all thinking, but we're all just too politically correct to say it. In reality, such right-wing figures aren't saying what we're all thinking. There are a lot of people who don't agree with those ideas at all. A good analogy would be Brexit. If Pie went off on one about how terribly the Brexit negotiations have been handled, and the omni-incompetence on display by pretty much every elected and unelected individual involved, then it could be said that he's saying what we're all thinking. I don't know many people who consider the Brexit negotiations to be anything other than a complete shambles. However, if Pie instead began pointing out how obviously stupid the decision to leave the EU was and how clear it was that we are better off remaining, well then, it can no longer be truthfully said that he is saying what we're all thinking or pointing out the obvious truth that everybody is too afraid to say. Indeed, he is directly contradicting the beliefs of somewhere around half the UK population. Moreover, by centering his channel on expressing obvious points of view, Pie ends up lacking any force when it comes to changing people's minds. See, I understand that a lot of what I say on this channel is controversial, therefore I try to be respectful in my language, charitable in my presentation of opposing arguments, and convincing when presenting my own arguments. Pie, conversely, is all about pointing out the obvious truth, therefore he is disrespectful, uncharitable, and unconvincing. So if Pie were to ever make a video dealing with a topic that he doesn't really know much about, we'd expect it to be pretty awful. Enter Jonathan Pie's The Gender Pay Gap. Now, you might be hoping that the substance of this response will be that Jonathan Pie makes an argument and then I explain why this argument doesn't work. This is how most response videos work. However, that doesn't really work here because this whole video isn't a series of arguments being made by Pie, but rather it's a parody interview starring Pie playing a middle-of-the-road generic liberal feminist and this woman, her name isn't listed, playing a feminist who says the truths that no other feminists are willing to say. So let's look at it. So first of all, we see him picking his nose, so we know not to take him seriously, and that he's playing a character. Very subtle.
Congratulations on the book.
Did you enjoy it?
Are we ready?
I want to say that this is a joke about how feminists in the mainstream media don't engage with feminist literature, but I don't see how Pie could make such a joke when he himself has clearly not engaged with the feminist literature. And on the subject of feminist literature,
I'm here with Melissa Stevens, author of Times bestseller The Sex Delusion. Thank you so much for joining.
This book doesn't exist. See, I assume that Pie would have at least gone to the effort of finding a Christina Hoff Sommers type to express the feminism you're going to see here. So I wanted to look up this book and see how it was reviewed and perhaps even potentially read it at some point. It doesn't exist, and it seems that this woman isn't anything close to a feminist theorist. She is just an actor playing a feminist theorist. This is bizarre because this video is going to attempt to show that feminists aren't saying what the media tells you they're saying, and that really, feminism is being totally misrepresented. But we aren't being told this by a veteran feminist theorist like Germaine Greer or Catherine McKinnon, nor are we being told this by a young up-and-coming feminist author like Jessica Valenti, Natasha Walters, Laura Bates, Jennifer Baumgartner, Amy Richards. I could go on. Instead, we're being told this by an actor pretending to be a feminist.
What can we do about the fact that women, for example, are still paid less for the same work as men, or the fact that...
They're not.
Actually, yes they are. While it's true that the pay gap for the same work is lower than the broader pay gap that takes into account other factors, there was a rather famous report in the US that showed a steady 5% unexplained American pay gap. I may find that report at some point and include it as an image or in the description, but the same 5% unexplained pay gap exists in the UK when wages are adjusted. Indeed, as The Independent reports, around 2/3 of the UK gender pay gap cannot be explained by factors such as the relative lack of senior women in the workplace and the numbers of them who work part-time, according to new analysis by the Office for National Statistics. The ONS reported in October that the gender pay gap was 9.1% in 2017, meaning that on average men are paid more than women. Now, if she'd said, for example, that actually the wage gap reduces when talking about other factors and that the unexplained pay gap isn't the full extent of the concern, then she'd be right. There are known factors which cause the gender pay gap, but she says that there isn't a pay gap based on gender alone. In reality, there is a 5% difference between men and women's wages that can be explained by nothing other than the fact that men and women are different genders. So basically, the first thing this pretend feminist has said in this video that is supposed to show us an example of true feminism is in fact basically just a lie.
Women aren't paid less for the same work as men. That's illegal. That's been illegal since 1970. It's been illegal in the US since 1963.
Remember kids, illegal things don't happen.
Women earn 76p for every £1 a man earns.
No, they don't.
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily going to defend that specific number because these numbers move all over the place, but it's certainly true that women do earn around 80% of what men earn depending on the study. So again, just a straight up lie. To clarify a point, even if the pay gap were only reduced down to the unexplained pay gap, that would still be 95%, which is a fairly significant difference when we're talking about salaries in the tens of thousands.
7 in 10 people are buying into a deliberate misrepresentation of the facts by the media to sell news stories.
Misrepresentation of facts? I didn't realise that pretend feminists doing pretend interviews with pretend reporters felt so strongly about journalistic integrity.
Yeah. These don't take into account what type of work they're doing, whether they're full or part-time, what kind of choices they make in terms of balance between family and work. This is an aggregate figure. No, they just employ more men in higher positions.
She's saying all these genuine problems with a very dismissive tone as if the gender disparity in these areas don't matter. To clarify a point, it does matter. No supposed feminist would be talking about these issues as if they don't matter.
My point is, it's not a gender pay gap. There are lots of factors at play here.
Final reminder that there is a 5% unexplained gender pay gap, but even if we do just focus on the explained pay gap, there is still a disparity in the various causes of this pay gap based on gender. A gender disparity based on what work they're doing, whether they're full or part-time, the balance between work and family, is still a gender disparity, so it is a gender pay gap.
I mean, let's have a discussion about why women make the pretty sensible choices that they do, but let's not assume that their lower average earnings are all about sexism.
You say you want to have a discussion, but you've already framed the discussion by saying that the choices women make right now are sensible. Just to take one example of these sensible choices women supposedly make, women have a different work-family balance to men, meaning that women spend much more time at home doing unpaid labour than men. How is that a sensible choice? How is it a sensible choice to do work for free so that members of the other gender can do more work for more money, giving them more economic power and social clout, especially considering how shitty that gender has proven themselves to be to women throughout history? What part of facilitating the increase in disproportionate wealth for such a gender is a sensible choice? It seems to me like you just can't handle the fact that a lot of women might be making stupid choices, so you're insulating yourself against that reality by baking the presumption that these choices are sensible into your very acknowledgement that such a discussion is worth having. I could talk a lot about unpaid labour and just how much unpaid labour women do, but, well, if I started then I wouldn't stop, and we do have a lot more crap to get through.
If it were true that you could pay a woman less than a man for doing the same work, then you would only ever employ women.
I could address this in a lot more detail, but long story short, either people are paying women less due to subconscious misogyny, in which case they wouldn't be able to make such calculated choices about it, or they're making these choices due to actual misogyny, in which case it doesn't need to be explained why they wouldn't want to hire loads of women. This entire argument is based on an insanely simplistic understanding of sexism that basically says that men have to be fully conscious at all times of the ways that they treat women unequally.
The fact that there are more men in top positions is a reflection of the past, not of the present. You know, it will take time, but we're getting there.
Hopefully, but this idea that just naturally sexism will solve itself isn't a reason to start being dismissive to the women who are understandably enthusiastic about addressing the imbalance sooner rather than later. Yes, I agree there is no realistic quick fix, but I don't see how that means this isn't a serious issue.
Tesco's.
What about Tesco?
People that work on the shop floor who are predominantly women are paid £3 less than warehouse workers who are predominantly men.
So what? They're different jobs. The male workers on the shop floor get paid £3 less as well. It has nothing to do with gender.
So here we have the argument that since men who work in the predominantly female jobs get paid less as well, it therefore follows it has nothing to do with gender. This is what convinced me that I want to make this video, because she literally says, so what? To an undeniably significant issue. This area is a big part of modern feminist understanding for the wage gap. Who could have predicted that this fake feminist would not unpack the finer details? As Nicholson writes, in the days when most school teachers in America were men, teaching was a highly regarded profession. But now that it is a predominantly female occupation, it has lost much of its status. The same thing has happened in professions as diverse as medicine in Russia and growing cassavas in Nigeria. Now yes, a man today can become a school teacher and he will be paid less, just as women are. But the fact that women are paid less has everything to do with gender. We have innumerable examples of the wages brought in by certain jobs changing as the predominant gender in that job changes. Just because men are paid less for working in a predominantly female job, it doesn't therefore follow that the low wages in a predominantly female job have nothing to do with sexism. Indeed, Phillips and Taylor have a pretty good representation of this in their contribution to the book Feminism and History in the chapter Sex and Skill, Notes Towards Feminist Economics. They point out that Bob Cratchit, beloved supporting role in A Christmas Carol, was a file clerk, a well-paid and respected job for the time, despite his money woes presented in the story. However, nowadays we don't have file clerks, we have secretaries. The gender has changed, and with it has changed the name, the prestige, and the relative wage brought in by the job. We see this distinction over and over again. Janitors earn more than maids, and probation officers earn 3 times more than social workers. In all cases, it's the male-dominated jobs that pay the higher wages. Friedman points out another interesting example. In New Guinea culture, men grow yams and women grow sweet potatoes, but yams are considered to be worth considerably more, even though both require almost identical work and are, let's be honest, pretty indistinguishable vegetables. Sounds stupid, but wouldn't you know it, Phillips and Taylor are there to remind us that we're not much better in the UK, where working in a carton factory pays significantly more than working in a box factory, seemingly for no other reason than that the latter industry employs proportionally more women. Millett does a good job at relating this to how humanities subjects in school have been viewed with increasingly less respect as the degrees have become increasingly dominated by women, while Baumgartner and Richards point out the obvious disparity between male and female wages for playing football, because men have the luxury of playing football while women are relegated to playing women's football. There is no men's World Cup, there's just the World Cup. But there is a Women's World Cup. And all of this is ignoring the example actually provided in this video.
People that work on the shop floor who are predominantly women are paid £3 less than warehouse workers who are predominantly men.
Which our fake feminists can only counter by saying that men can work in these predominantly female jobs too and get paid the same low wage. But that isn't the point. The question is, why are predominantly female jobs so consistently paid less? Often with the relative wages of jobs changing as the workers become more female.
So what you're saying is, if you're a woman and you work on the shop floor and you want to earn £3 more an hour, just apply for a job in the warehouse?
Yes.
I'll just remind you that there are several examples of high-paying jobs dominated by men, and then women have moved into those jobs, and slowly those jobs have begun to pay relatively less. This is a phenomenon observed time and time again. So yes, women can simply apply to work in the high-paying jobs, but that doesn't speak to the fundamental problem that women's work is consistently undervalued, and inevitably, if women started working in the factory and men started working on the shop floor would begin to pay more. That's what the historical record suggests. Feminism shouldn't be about playing the game. Women can play the game and just apply to the stereotypically masculine jobs, but that helps nobody. The problem is the game itself, where women are consistently undervalued.
Most people in the UK believe in total equality of the sexes, but only 7% of the population actually call themselves feminists. Now that's a problem.
It's funny that our fake feminist seems to believe that she's the saviour of feminism fighting against those evil feminists who are trying to distort feminism. Meanwhile, she's basically an anti-feminist wet dream. Because now, we not only have to argue against this bullshit coming from anti-feminists, but we have to argue against this bullshit from the latest factual feminist who's going to show us what feminism should really be about.
you turn them into victims. Is that really empowering young women?
I've heard it's very good, though.
Oh, feminism is about autonomy and choice. It is the opposite of being a victim. Let's tell women the truth. The reason why many earn less over their lifetime is because of the choices they make. And feminism shouldn't ever be about berating women who decide to raise a family or to go part-time or who, don't want to take the overtime. Women who choose to prioritise their physical and mental health over having a full-time career.
We can't use any of this.
This fake feminist basically said that the true misogyny would be to challenge women's choices before attributing women's low wages to the fact that they are physically and mentally unable to engage in work as much as men. For the record, I agree that a lot of people's current working regimes are fucked up and bad for mental and physical health. However, to attribute women's lower wages to their particular mental and physical vulnerability is insanely sexist. She's essentially saying that women are delicate flowers who shouldn't be expected to do the overtime or work full-time. Come on, wouldn't it be much better for their mental health if they were doing unpaid work in the home and making babies like they're supposed to? You are a literal pawn of patriarchy, and I don't give a shit if you call me misogynistic for saying that, because you're a woman and apparently I'm not allowed to criticize your choices to say this bullshit because that would make me misogynistic. Somebody who stresses women's general inability to work as hard as men to earn the same pay is in no position to call others misogynistic.
You've got police in Nottingham making catcalling a prosecutable hate crime. It's not a hate crime, it's just really disgusting behaviour.
Why is it not a hate crime? Catcalling is an invasive sexual act committed by one gender against another. I really need this very real and legitimate feminist theorist to explain to me why that isn't a hate crime.
Because when men make these points, they are dismissed as sexist, and when women like me make these points, we are told that we are suffering from internalised misogyny, which really pisses me off, because to suggest that a woman can't form her own opinion, that is real misogyny.
There is nothing sexist about suggesting that patriarchy affects women. Indeed, to suggest that women have some kind of magical patriarchy immunity that causes patriarchy to have no effect on them would be completely ridiculous. I also want to point out something kind of funny, which is that this woman is advocating choice feminism, which essentially states that any choice taken by a woman is empowering simply because it's their choice. This is the feminism most popular with the mainstream media, which Pi is supposed to be representing. It is the feminism held to by Emma Watson and also by the BBC itself, what with their classic "the burqa isn't sexist because it's a choice" video. Now, by contrast, actual feminist theorists, to put it mildly, have slightly more sophisticated and nuanced takes than just women choosing things equals good, challenging women's choices equals bad. Indeed, actual feminist theorists are almost without exception willing to concede that sometimes a woman's choice may be bad for her, and perhaps also bad for women as a collective. Therefore, such women's choices would be anti-feminist. Now, by contrast, in this video, we have Pi playing a member of the mainstream media, advancing a position much more similar to an actual feminist theorist, while we have this woman playing a fictional best-selling feminist author and theorist, advocating the most inchoate feminism imaginable. So this video is essentially taking dumb reductionist feminism and presenting it as the feminism that we'd actually see if we listen to feminist theorists instead of the lamestream media.
Do you know that women in their 20s are earning more currently than their male counterparts, or that women have been outperforming men at universities for the past 25 years?
This is true. It's also true that women stop outperforming men when they have children and get married. According to Valenti and Full Frontal Feminism, for every year a woman in her 20s waits to have children, her lifetime earnings go up by 10%. That is a staggering figure and a huge reason for any woman watching this right now to not have children, which is a bit of a shame what of the whole needing to continue the human race thing. But to harken back to what fake feminists said earlier, having a child any given year when you can increase your earnings by 10% if you wait until next year is not a sensible decision. And since being able to have children is a rather defining part of being a woman, yes, that's sexism. You can't just bring up the fact that women in their 20s are outperforming or matching men while ignoring the fact that for very sexist reasons, they eventually fall behind men.
How about the fact that the state has made very little effort to subsidise childcare? It's a nightmare for young parents.
Oh good, gender neutral language. Poor parents. It's so hard for parents. How do parents manage? To clarify a point, I do believe both men and women should get paid parental leave, but the use of gender-neutral language here implies that this is a gender-neutral problem, and it isn't.
I'm being told we need to go again, I'm afraid, so we're going to just start from the top. I will read your book, by the way, I promise.
Do you fancy going for a drink after?
Okay.
That was weird. I mean, did Pi write this sketch? It doesn't seem to be improvised, so maybe this line was improvised? I just don't know why this line was included. Now this video has been rather bizarre because Jonathan Pye isn't presenting us with anti-feminism. He isn't saying that feminism is stupid, instead he's presenting a version of feminism that no serious feminist actually believes and saying that this is real feminism, and that the lamestream media needs to stop misrepresenting feminism. In essence, the video is encouraging the audience to become feminists by understanding that the feminism presented in the mainstream media isn't real feminism, which is kind of true, but the feminism presented here as real feminism is even worse. And I honestly can't see this video convincing anybody to become a feminist, even Pye's personal shitty brand of feminism. Here's what really irks me about this whole thing. The idea kind of makes sense. The idea of having a video which interrogates the ways in which feminism has been misrepresented. And I call that video, this video right now which you're watching, where I have shown how Jonathan Pye has completely misrepresented feminism. But ultimately, this is an example of why Pye's style doesn't really work for topics where there is any nuance, because essentially this video is making fun of somebody for not understanding true feminism. That's the video. It's a fake feminist playing a feminist theorist telling somebody else that their understanding of feminism is wrong. However, as much as I personally hate it, choice feminism deserves more than to simply be mocked. These topics are complex, and it's worth actually engaging the arguments seriously, rather than just playing some over-the-top satirical character for the sake of a cheap joke. And with that in mind, I leave you with the one person this Jonathan Pye video was able to convince to become a feminist.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's Epic SJW Destruction Gaming here, hashtag Gamers Rise Up, and I've been seeing this Jonathan Pye video, and to be honest, it's really got me convinced, because as you know, I'm an anti-feminist, but I saw this video and it was basically showing how really, real feminists, they don't care about these issues like, inequality in the workplace or anything like that. They're focusing on things like choice, which I think is really important because a lot of feminists, they don't really appreciate choice. If some impoverished Southeast Asian woman wants to choose to become my mail order waifu, then that's their choice. And honestly, if you're against that, you're the real misogynist. So at first I wasn't completely sure, but I went onto YouTube and I saw that there were all these feminist videos, and I realized they were all by men, like talking over women and just dominating the conversation. That really suited me because that's what I like to do whenever I'm in a space where there are women. I like to kind of dominate the conversation and just talk over all of them. So that was really good. And then I saw that a lot of them were like really up my alley because they were, bragging about how women were getting deplatformed and kicked off Twitter and blocked off YouTube and things like that, and getting their channels deleted. Because I guess they just hate women, which suits me. Love hating women. There was one thing which was throwing me off a bit, which was this whole like male privilege thing, because I don't really like that, because how's it male privilege that I have to spend every day of my life cry wanking to pictures of Anita Sarkeesian? So I didn't really believe in this whole male privilege thing. But then I found out a lot of these guys, they just pretend that they're not men. There's a guy called Peter Coffin, and he likes to pretend that he's not a man and that he actually has no gender at all, which I guess is a lot like role play, because when I'm role playing, I always like to pretend that I'm a different gender. I like to pretend I'm a woman with massive boobs. So I can kind of relate to that already because I'm kind of used to that. So I figured, I can just pretend that I've got no gender, and I don't have to feel bad about that whole male privilege thing. And also, obviously, if I want to, say, follow a woman into a bathroom or something, I can just decide that I'm a woman for a while. So that's great. I'm really loving the new direction feminism is going in. It's really appealing to me, which is great. And also, I kind of already feel a bit of a spiritual connection to Peter Coffin because just like me, he has a fake anime waifu girlfriend. So, me too. Oh God, I wish I had a body pillow. I didn't actually plan this out that much. I mean, I have the hat, but I was planning on growing my beard and things, but, well, shit got in the way. Anyway, Epic Gamers, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, just tweet it to Sargon, Teal'Deer, and is he still a thing? Paul Joseph Watson, Black Pigeon Speaks, Lauren Southern? I don't know. Other anti-feminists, just tweet it to them. Get Computing Forever, is he still a thing? And then hopefully I'll become YouTube royalty amongst the anti-feminist crowd. Oh boy.
Thank you to my current patrons: Hannah Taylor, LRX89, Stephen, Kirsten, Nancy Diamond, Stephen Lester, Rosemary Furman, and Eric Hernandez. You're all very appreciated.
Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can!